Today, I'm excited to dive in with Nick Van Landschoot, CTO and co-founder of InTrace. Thanks for being here, Nick.
Of course.
So I would love to know more about what you're building because I don't have that much knowledge about open source intelligence and all the ways that it's sort of manifesting and coming and solving problems. So maybe you can tell us a bit about InTrace and what problem you're solving.
Yeah, so I'm building Intertrace, and it's a platform that supports intelligence operations, whether for police departments, militaries, or cyber threat intelligence divisions, a lot of people like that. And we use swarms of specialized AI agents to uncover what's publicly available information, but is often hard to access, and it's known as open source intelligence.
What makes it open source intelligence?
So, open source intelligence encompasses either publicly available or commercially available information. So, if it's locked up behind a government database somewhere, it's not OSINT. But if it's locked up behind a corporate database or it's just out there on the web or the dark web somewhere, then it's open source.
Huh, interesting. How did you come to this as the focus for your business?
Yeah, so I started a company out of high school and was lucky enough to get some funding for it. And back then we were focused on um, building out this tool to generate APIs. So it was really a developer tool. And we just found there wasn't a lot of need for that tool. We couldn't get to product market fit with it. Maybe for a bootstrap business, we could have gotten there, made like 5K a month or so, but it just wasn't scaling fast enough. So we knew we had to pivot, and we started looking for ideas in different domains. And I actually put together a list of, what do I think is going to make a good space for an AI agent company. And we knew agents were going to be the future, is what everyone's saying. It's honestly just regarded as this obvious thing now. So we're looking at, I put together, again, a bunch of criteria. We're thinking we want something that's data heavy, for example. Basically what you would think. We also had a few realizations that I think are kind of non-standard. One of my criteria was I wanted something in a regulation heavy space, because in any regulation heavy space, there are often a lot of workflows that can be automated, and you can get in a lot of subject matter expertise on how to do compliance. That can create a moat. It's really easy to create a lot of this AI software, so we wanted something that was going to be complex, and we kind of settled between healthcare and law enforcement. So we started talking to professionals in both domains, and open source intelligence was something that just kept coming up over and over again with all of these law enforcement professionals, and that's how we settled on the idea.
So give me the because. It kept coming up repeatedly in the conversations, but in
Yeah,
what
so
context?
why now? Well, open source intelligence is really just a rapidly growing field. 40 years ago, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have all this information, and there's a data explosion essentially, especially with social media. There are subfields of OSINT. One of them is known as SOCMINT, or social media intelligence. That's getting really big right now, and you can get a lot of insights and investigations out of things like social media accounts, leaked passwords, information that just didn't really exist at the scale it does 20 years ago.
So how is that being used?
So it's used in a lot of contexts. One big context is for cyber threat intelligence. So you're at a company and you want to monitor threats against that company. You want to, for example, scan the dark web to see if there are any threat actors planning attacks. You want to see if there have been any credential breaches on your company. If you're a police department, maybe you're using it to conduct investigations. So when I was just starting out, I actually went on Upwork to just get some experience with OSINT. And I did a bunch of things like locating lost recordings of old radio shows. But one of the things I actually got to do was work on a homicide case. You wouldn't think you could do that on
Hmm.
Upwork, but it turns out you can. And we were able to, find some leaked credentials which map to a username, which map to this Amazon account and a bunch of other social media accounts. But with that, you can go and you can maybe subpoena the post office to see where this person is living, since they've gone on the run. All of their other social media is out of date. They're obviously trying to stay on the down low. But even from really niche registrations like that, you can still sometimes find where someone lives. It's really amazing what you can find.
That's fascinating. And by the way, that's super interesting going to a site to do, make work here and there to go find and learn more about that particular area. How did you come up with that idea? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I've done some contracting in the past, not on Upwork, but I knew there were broad postings on there. So I knew there'd be some stuff for open source intelligence, and I figured it was just going to be a good way to get experience in the field, because I had some baseline cybersecurity experience before, but I really didn't know all that much about open source intelligence, to be honest.
Interesting. No, I think it's fascinating when people spend the time to actually, walk the shoes, to live the life of the user they're actually trying to build something for. I think it helps with that sensitivity and understanding the empathy and understanding what types of problems you're really trying to solve. Have you found that it's also helped you as you're imagining your users and taking this to market and sort of meeting them with the tools that they need?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we're building these agents, and really just our entire product, whenever you're doing product design, it's really important to be able to narrow down on what are the actual issues we're solving and what are the workflows that our users go through. And even, using the software that they're used to using before. One of our biggest competitors is known as Maltigo, taking some time to use that, and they're used to clicking on these buttons in these ways. We probably want to have something that's maybe nicer, but mirrors those same interactions in a way that they're going to understand.
No, that's fascinating. Have you found it challenging as you're bringing a new way of thinking to OSINT?
For sure, OSINT is a very complex field. You could probably spend your whole life learning how to do it, and there's so many different subdomains. So, some people will be doing the social media stuff. Sometimes you're looking at address records. But then we've talked to some really high-level investigators who do crazy things, flying drones over pipeline leaks and for like the stock prices, things like that.
Can you explain that a little bit more? That sounds fascinating. They're using drones to look down a pipeline to understand where there are potential issues, and that leads to fraud elsewhere. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I could explain a few different examples. Like airspace is not really regulated in the same way as a lot of other things. So there's no such thing as private airspace in most locations. So if you want to look at a factory to see what their inventory is, are they committing fraud? Maybe you're working for a hedge fund. You want to see where it's going. There's stuff like that as well. People submit, FOIA requests to police departments, and
That's
really any
fascinating.
government facility that can hold records. So there's a lot
So
of
they can
service level
use,
stuff.
yeah, so they can use surveillance looking over, because the airspace isn't regulated in the same manner, to sort of deduce information about what's happening in the factories or on the pipeline or in those different environments.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just one example. So there's a lot of the surface level stuff with social media. But there's also a lot of really high level of stuff that can get really specific. And I think on the software side, we try to focus more on the generalized stuff. But it's interesting to see all of these other methods that people have of getting open source data.
Well, I was going to ask, how do you get the data? How do you bring that in?
Yeah, so on our side, we mostly partner with different providers. So there are companies for leaked passwords, for example. That's all out there on the dark web. We could get that ourselves, but it would take a really long time. So we partner with 3 different API providers to get that. One of them is DarkSide by a company called District 4. Another one of them is called Leak Check. And then there's one called Snufspace, which is kind of hard to get access to. You have to go and talk to these people on the dark web, say like you have all these leaked records and they give you an API key through the email. So some of the data sources are definitely hard to access. There are a lot of, providers of open source intelligence that come out of very reputable sources. There's also some sources that are less reputable. You have a lot of Russian intel companies, and it's important to try to get access to that data. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, but we try to provide our investigators with as much data as possible always.
I mean, if you're comfortable talking about it, I'd love to understand better, like how you see the social impact of pulling all this information together and putting agents on top of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I get a lot of questions about the ethics of what we're doing. And I don't have many dilemmas because all the data we do pull is openly available. So
Absolutely.
if we're going into a public Telegram channel, for example, or even a private one, in some cases, there's something called a sock puppet that if you our police department with a subpoena, you go and you infiltrate that account with. Um, but if you're posting something online, I think you have to assume it's public, and I think it is public whether we make it so or not. So I just view it as we're putting the data in the hands of the good guys. If you're a um, scammer, if you're trying to commit identity theft or something, um, you already have access to that info, and we don't work with those people anyways. So
Of course not. I have a similar, I mean, with my kids, I've always tried to relate to them. Anything you put on the web, not only is it there for anyone to see, but it's there permanently for people to see forever. I was curious on the social impact side, there's the ethics, which I agree with you. I think that data is there already and you can look at it already. And certainly with all the different mechanisms, it's easier and easier to go find and do searches. Certainly even when I'm prospecting, I'm looking at Reddit threads. I'm looking at what people have said back and forth when I'm doing prospecting. I'm curious about what you think the larger impact will be as we start to pull these data sets together. Do you think law enforcement is going to change? Do you think that how we go about doing some of this investigative work will change now that you can start to pull together these data sets and you can provide these tools? That's sort of the dimension I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on.
yeah, for sure, I do. I think it's almost analogous to the increase of security cameras throughout cities. I think it just becomes much harder to commit crimes. I think we'll have more law and order. I guess the other aspect of it is I hope it also makes it so that there's a need for less overt surveillance. There are a
Hmm.
lot of companies that do um, what I'd call mandatory surveillance, where you can't really opt out of it unless you just fully don't participate in society. So I actually really like the idea of taking this open data that people have put out there willingly and using it to solve cases, using it for military intelligence even,
Oh, that's
so that we don't
interesting.
have to have more surveillance.
Yeah, I'd love to understand that better. Like I think there's an analog in advertising where, and I've always wrestled with this. Um, if I were to provide more information to the advertisers, then they could actually target me much more clearly with things that I actually care about, as opposed to targeting me with just like the spray and pray advertising that's so annoying and it's completely irrelevant to me. I'm a mountain biker. So if you want to talk to me about mountain bikes, I'm probably going to listen. But, if you talk to me about some other sport, I'm less inclined. So I'm curious, do you see a similar analog here that you're also referring to where, yes, this information is being aggregated so we can start to understand behaviors, but maybe this allows you to separate having to give even more? Like, tell me more how you see that coming together.
Yeah, I do think it's similar in a lot of ways. And those advertising channels that collect data can even be a source for OSINT. I think the biggest difference there is the advertising stuff usually has slightly less of an impact for personal privacy because, to my understanding, what they do is they collect profiles of your general consumer, and it can be very accurate. But it's not targeted to a very specific person. And so I honestly think the privacy impact there is large, but a little smaller.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you see a similar um, having the data aggregated in a positive fashion would actually help people on the whole, so that they don't have to give up even more and more information and sort of cut corners. I mean,
Yeah,
here we're talking
exactly.
basically about surveillance, right?
Yeah, I think having an opt out button is important for sure. And I think it makes it easier to do that, of course, when you have these generalized profiles.
But it can't opt out of, I can't opt out of a video camera on the street. So I guess that's the bridge
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm hoping to understand a little bit better. Like, how do you bridge that similar, you're expressing this notion of how it can be a positive, right?
Yeah, like
Maybe you can
I
help
guess I'd
bridge
put it
that.
like this. Maybe if we can solve 95% of homicides through open source intelligence, we don't need security cameras taking pictures of license plates every 10 minutes down the road, right?
Or people listening to all the phone calls just because they're trying to catch that one. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense. That's
exactly.
really interesting. And so how have you brought agents into this? Because I think I mean, I can imagine different ways you've done it, but I'm curious, how have you brought LLMs and models into this mix to help people?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first we start from the ground up building a new open source intelligence platform. And I think that's the most important part, to be honest. So we get our UI down and we get all the actions you can do. So one of them it's called a transform, one of our tools. You can start with an email. And I've talked a lot about leaked passwords. So you get a leaked password, but you could also get connected social media accounts. You could start with a name, get corporate registrations, things like that. And we have, link analysis tools. And then we have a tool called Social Vault that just lets you go and download someone's entire profile and a lot of things like that. Basically just replicating what's already been done and making it nice. And at that point, that's where you can start to bring in these AI tools. So what we do is we create an AI chat. And we think it's really important that the AI can do everything that the investigator can do, but that the investigator can also do everything that the AI can do. And that helps to create a shared vocabulary between the user and the AI. So if the user knows, okay, this feature is called a transform, and I want to have the AI run transforms on all of these emails and analyze the results, it becomes very easy for our users to speak in their own language to the AI and have the AI understand what it needs to do. And in a lot of AI systems, you'll get a response that says, well, that's not within my capabilities. I can't do that. And sometimes there are good reasons for it, but I think that's really frustrating to users. So as much as we can, we always want to have our agents have, a really specific view of the data we have. We want to have a very built out way to interact with our platform in the exact same way the user would.
So you're also, in many respects, educating your user about how the agents work and how the system works so they can use a vocabulary that both sides can understand, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, exactly. As they use the platform manually, they implicitly learn how to prompt the AI.
Interesting. And how has adoption been? Has that been working? Have you had any resistance?
Um, yeah, when we look at our statistics, and in our beta testing group, we have about 50 people, and we see about 90 to 95% of them using these AI features pretty heavily.
Interesting. Are those features mandatory in order to use the system, or are there other mechanisms that they can use?
They're not mandatory to use the systems. We never want to force someone to use AI where they don't want to. So when you go to start an investigation with our platform, for example, there are several ways to do it. You can either, start with a prompt, say investigate this. You can create a new blank investigation. If you're starting with our Social Vault tool, you can go and you can put in a URL to a Twitter account or an Instagram account or a Telegram profile or channel and have the tool manually download everything from there without AI. And then at any point in that process, you can choose to, manually analyze the data, or you can have the AI. If you download a Telegram channel, for example, say, I want to see if there's any threatening language in here, look through all the data. So we see a lot of people, maybe 75%, doing investigations completely autonomously. But there's a pretty good chunk of users as well who will have the AI jump in once they've already done some manual collection to analyze the data, or even think of what are called new pivots. You can often go in a lot of different directions with an OSINT investigation. Do I want to go down this rabbit hole or the other one? And what even are the rabbit holes to go down? And that's another place where the AI could be very helpful.
Yeah, that's fascinating. As a product person myself, I'm always surprised when I have a product and people start using it in ways that I don't expect. Are you seeing some of that same behavior as you're making these agents available to people with the data? Are you seeing them use the agents in new ways that you hadn't expected ahead of time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think the almost the point of open source intelligence is to use the data in an unexpected way. So we've definitely set up our platform in a way that can account for that. And I have seen some data flows that have been very unexpected, things that go, give a specific example. Someone starts with a very public username, a fairly public figure. They go and they find leaked passwords, and they find another account with the same leaked password with a less public username. And they do that chain like 3 times, and then
And
they
back their way in.
find an account that's associated with some illicit activity that way. So I
Hmm.
think that's a really interesting workflow that I've seen a lot of people have success with. We also, have seen some demand for international person searches. So you have people that will take a phone number and map it back to a username, and that doesn't go anywhere, but they get a name off of it. But it turns out that person often lives in some Eastern European country. So we had to build out a bunch of person search tools for Eastern European countries to say you have this person during Kazakhstan. Where do they live?
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, in many respects, and I don't think it's that unusual, but you're in a data game. Ultimately, you're looking for data sources and trying to link as much of it together and giving people a good way to be able to mix and match and be creative, which is interesting because at that point, you're not replacing anyone's job. You're actually literally enhancing people who are there and trying to help them make better connections. Um,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, when we started testing our tool, when we were first building it, we would try to test it out and it would be essentially useless because most of the investigations wouldn't go anywhere. You just run out of data, you'd hit a dead end. But as we've added in more and more data sources, that almost never happens. And you can usually find, something interesting if there's something to be found.
no, and we're seeing more and more examples of this as people are trying to pull interesting data sets together and then provide agents to look across them. What's your sort of big bet for where agents are going to go and the new capabilities that you're expecting to be able to take advantage of that are coming out of the overall market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really has to do with what's signal versus what's noise. Right now, I think the biggest challenge for us has definitely been filtering down what's a real data point, what actually is relevant to this investigation. And um, some places it's pretty good already. We work a lot with broad sentiment analysis. So if you want to analyze terror threats and who's going to commit a terrorist attack, you want to download a lot of data from platforms like X and Telegram, and you want to monitor conversations going on there. If you want to track propaganda, you do something similar. And where there's already that element of natural language, the AI is actually really good at filtering down what signal and noise. If you're doing something more related to individual person investigation, where the data um, looks less like social media posts and more like account names and addresses, Bitcoin addresses. Um, that's where it's still a little bit harder to get the AI to say, okay, um, this is the right person. Sometimes if you run a search on a name, if it's a common name or even a fairly common name, and you're looking for corporate registrations, you'll have many return, and a human can go through that and spend hours and hours and hours trying to determine what signal, what's noise, which account actually belongs to which person, and that's where the AI still has struggled. And I think as it gets better, we'll be able to automate that process a lot more and save a lot of time.
Yeah, maybe even save lives. I know that that's been a concern with some of the violence in schools, that heart-wrenching moment where the data was there and there was no way to sift through it and understand what was going on. And I can hope that, exactly as you're saying, sentiment analysis and being able to find signal in the noise and is going to help us figure some of these out ahead of time. It'd be amazing. Um, I wonder also if performance is an issue for you because you must be dealing with massive data sets. Are you finding that compressing the time it takes to ask questions and get feedback is a problem?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we found is the easiest way to solve it is just to have it usually be a fairly long running process. If it's high value, um, it's okay if it takes 5 minutes to return if it's automated in an hour of work. So it definitely takes longer than we would like right now. And we've built in a lot of optimizations into it. There's a lot of concurrency within our system that does multiple things at the same time and unifies it together.
Is that the usual ratio, by the way? You just mentioned a few minutes to do hours of work. Is that the kind of ratio you're seeing, that you're able to help people get an insight that would have taken them many hours and you can just do it in a few minutes?
It really depends, what step you're at. So certainly with
Hmm.
analysis, for sure, when we're looking through social media accounts specifically, like that's where you can really save a lot of time. Then there's you know, so I guess I'll just go through each step. OSINT, for reference, usually works in a cycle. So I'll give a simplified cycle here. So the first step is usually planning the direction. I think that's a step that it's important to keep fairly human for now, at least at first. We want to look at these data sources. And the AI can still help there, especially less experienced investigators. So if you have a junior OSINT analyst, it could be great to help out with that. That doesn't save all that much time because it doesn't take all that much time in the first place. The next step is the collection of the data. So I talked about transforms before. This is where you're starting from a data point and collecting more info, getting as much data as you can on them. The AI could definitely save time here. And collection is also a very complicated process sometimes. So we have a lot of network transforms. One of them is called Shodan. It's a tool that can help map out physical network resources. And it has a lot of filters and flags that take a lot of skill to use. In this, we were able to, find some pretty severe vulnerabilities in nation states. A person may not have because they aren't so good at chaining the tool together a bunch and using it. And here, this
Hmm.
is where we maybe see a 25 to 50% increase in productivity. Um,
Wow.
and maybe we collect 10% more info, but that 10% more info can be really valuable to an investigation on occasion. Like OSINT is really looking for a needle in a haystack, and you have to make
Right.
the haystack really, really big or risk the needle not being there.
Yeah. You can't
The
find it. I mean,
next
it's just
step,
plain statistics.
yeah, exactly. Then the next step is processing. So that's where you've collected all this data, you have it. Now you have to look through, analyze what's important, what's not. And this is where we're really seeing those, 5 minutes to hours of work ratio.
Hmm.
And that's where we think it's really useful to filter through data. And then the other thing we're working on right now is dissemination and reporting. So once you come to this conclusion, OSINT is rarely the end of an investigation. Usually it's a step in the process. So usually you're producing a report and handing it off to someone else. And who you're handing off to can depend on the investigation. If you're doing cyber threat analysis, it's probably the report's the end product. And if there's no threat, it's kept in file and it's there. If you're doing something with terrorism, you might be handling it off if you find a threat to a more specific team to go and work on that. But these reports have a lot of regulation behind them. There's really specific language you have to use. Even if you use the word very likely, there's a legal definition for that. If you use the word probably,
Hmm.
there's a legal definition for that. And then there's standards for how these things have to be written. So we
And
think we can save a lot of time there as well,
that
because
makes a lot of
reporting
sense.
takes like a lot of time for these investigators, we found.
Yeah, I can imagine. And also there's explainability, right? That's the other piece. You can't just have a finding. You have to be able to, I'm assuming you have to be able to trace it. You have to be able to explain how that finding came about,
Yeah,
original data
exactly. You have to
sources,
be
what
able
process
to
was used.
Yeah, you have to be able to trace it and you have to maintain the chain of custody, it's called. So if
Right.
you're going to go and use this in court to get a conviction, you have to show that this data hasn't been tampered with. You have to show, okay, it verifiably went from this source to this source to this source. That's 100%. So that's very important as well.
Yeah, a lot of complexity to that. That's fascinating. I've really appreciated learning so much about OSINT, and what you're building and how you're pulling agents into this. I'd love to end the podcast on a question that is a little bit orthogonal, but I don't think too much so. You have all these people using your system. They're being exposed to AI and to agents. What do you think is the human skill that people really need to focus on to be ready to adapt to or be ready for this new world of agents and co-pilots that we're all building?
Yeah, I think the answer I would give is honestly, baseline neuroplasticity. You look at even things like smartphones in the past, and you usually see that younger people are adopting them at a higher rate. And it's not because they're younger, usually it's because they have this higher degree of neuroplasticity. They're able to learn more things quickly. So I think, even doing something like learning a new language, just keeping your mind active, can really be an asset as you move from an old set of technology to a newer set of technology. And I think that's the most important thing to increase adoption.
And new ways of thinking that come
Yeah,
with it.
exactly.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it. I love learning all this new information. Maybe it helps me with my neural plasticity. New information about OSINT and how agents can be brought to a new market that otherwise would be untouched. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, well, of course, man. I enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on.